She hadn't meant to walk into Apache territory. She hadn't meant to walk anywhere, really. Not with her ribs still aching from her stepfather's last kick. Not with blood still dried on her blouse from 2 nights before. But something in her kept moving, like a stubborn ember in the ashes. By the time the sun cracked over the mountains, her boots were torn at the soles, and her breath came in hiccuping gasps. Her dress, once yellow, was caked in brown dust, its hem fraying like the memory of her mother's voice. When she saw the movement in the canyon below, she didn't flinch. A line of riders, silent as ghosts, emerged from between the rocks, boughs slung over their backs, eyes sharp beneath black hair. She thought briefly that they would kill her. A trespasser, a white girl stumbling into sacred lands, bruised and delirious. But instead, they paused. One of them, a boy no older than 16, saw her sway and fall to her knees. He muttered something in a low voice, and the others dismounted in a smooth, wordless motion. She tried to speak, but her throat had nothing left. Only her body spoke now, the dark rings beneath her eyes, the bruises stretching like ink beneath her collarbone. One of the warriors approached, wrapped in deerskin, and knelt beside her. He didn't touch her. Not yet. He just looked. She realized then how long it had been since someone looked at her without judgment, without hunger. "Water," she rasped, her voice a scratch in the wind. He held out a canteen. She drank too fast, choking, but didn't stop. When she was done, he pointed towards the ridge. They were taking her somewhere. She didn't ask where. She no longer believed in safety, only movement. They guided her to a low bluff, where a circle of tall pines stood like sentries. Smoke curled from a small fire, and a woman with hair down to her waist stood by a cooking pot, eyes narrowing as the girl limped closer. There was no welcome, but there was no rejection either. Just watching. Always watching. She sat by the fire and curled her arms around herself, shivering though the sun had risen. Her ribs throbbed, her mind buzzed, and in the stillness between breaths, she felt it. A presence deeper in the camp, watching not with suspicion, but with knowing. She didn't know it yet, but the chief had seen her arrive, and he had already sent for the elders. The second time she saw him, she didn't know he was the chief. He wasn't adorned in feathers or sitting on a throne. He simply stepped from behind a curtain of pine needles, quiet as snow, and sat across from her near the fire. His face was carved with lines that spoke of winters survived and wars mourned, but his eyes, black as polished obsidian, were clear and steady. He didn't speak, not yet, and so she didn't either. Around them, the camp moved with the slow rhythm of mourning. Children ran with bare feet, women stirred cornmeal and broth, and somewhere in the trees a drum pulsed like a second heartbeat. She hugged her knees tighter. She knew how they saw her. Broken. Lost. Pale and strange and thin as a dying willow. But worse than all that, she smelled of weakness, the kind men like her stepfather exploited, the kind her townspeople mocked. She had no pride left, only proof of what had been done to her. That was when the chief leaned forward, not to question, not to accuse, but to offer something from a pouch at his side. A folded cloth, coarse but clean. She looked at it, confused. Then she understood. It was an invitation, not to speak, but to show. Slowly she unwrapped her shawl. Then, as the morning sun slanted through the trees, she stood. Her fingers shook. Her breath came short, and with a single trembling motion she lifted the side of her dress just above her hips to reveal the map the world had carved into her. Bruises, long faded to green and yellow, webbed across her side. Raised white scars, healed poorly, curled along her ribs in half-moons. One line, deeper than the rest, snaked from beneath her arm down to her waist. She didn't look at him while she exposed it. She'd never shown anyone before, not fully, not like this, not without shame pressing her spine into the ground. But this time, she stayed standing. When she finally looked at him, expecting disgust or pity, she found neither. The chief had leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his brows drawn together. Not in revulsion, but in reverence. Slowly, deliberately, he extended his hand. Not to grab, not to possess, but to hover, just above the scarred skin, as if asking permission from the air itself. When she gave the smallest nod, he touched the longest scar with 2 fingers. Not roughly, not like a man, like a prayer. Then he whispered something. 1 word. She didn't know it then, but later she'd learn it meant chosen. He stood and left without another sound, but everything had already changed. Not because he saw her wounds, but because he saw through them. And for the first time since her mother died, she didn't feel filthy. She felt seen. They didn't call him grandfather, though he had gray in his braids and a back curved by years. They called him Tanathoa, which she would later learn meant he who remembers the pattern. That morning, after the chief disappeared into the trees, a younger woman with warm, wide-set eyes motioned for her to follow. She hesitated, still dizzy from what had just happened, from the way his fingers had rested on her scars, as if they were symbols worth reading. But her feet obeyed before her doubts could speak. The woman led her past the fire circle, past drying hides and smoky fish racks, to a bark-covered lodge that smelled of cedar, roots, and old truth. Inside, Tanathoa sat on furs, hunched over a mat where stones and bones lay arranged in spirals. He didn't look up when she entered. "Sit," he said in a voice that sounded like walking through dry leaves. She obeyed, settling onto the opposite side of the mat, trying to fold herself small. "You carry the kind of wounds that don't bleed anymore," he said. "But they poison just the same." She said nothing. Her throat was dry. Her ribs ached where the chief had touched them, as if the memory itself pulsed. Tanathoa moved 1 stone with his crooked finger. "When a tree is cut, it doesn't forget. The rings remember. So do you." She frowned, unsure. "What do you mean?" He looked at her for the first time then, his eyes clouded but deep, full of patience that had lived longer than hate. "The ones who hurt you tried to make you forget who you are. They cut you until your story bled out. But your story is still there, girl. Under the bruises, under the silence. I can't find it for you, but I can teach you to speak it again." He gestured to the stones. "Each one a pain, each one a step. We place them in order, not to relive what happened, but to take the power back from it." She stared at the spiral. She didn't know if she had a story worth telling. She only had fragments. Her mother's lullabies, the smell of soap that day, the wordless screams when it first happened. "I don't even know where to start," she whispered. Tanathoa smiled. "You already did when you let him see." Her mind jumped to the chief's steady eyes, the reverent way he had touched her ribs like reading sacred text. "You showed him pain," Tanathoa continued. "Now show yourself the shape of it. That's how you take the knife from their hands." For a moment, the fire cracked between them. Then, slowly, she reached toward the stones. Her hand hovered over the first one, unsure, but then her fingers curled around it. It was smooth, cold, real. Her heartbeat settled, her shoulders dropped. She wasn't just a body they had scarred. She was still someone becoming. That night, the village was quiet except for the wind hissing through the pine needles and the distant call of an owl. She sat alone near the outer fire, her knees tucked up to her chest, the stones from Tanathoa still clutched in her lap. The younger women had invited her to sleep inside, but she'd shaken her head. She needed air, space, silence. But more than that, she needed to feel the voice she hadn't used in years, not the one she used to beg, or to cry, or to scream, the one she'd buried beneath every bruise. When the moon lifted above the treetops, casting silver over the snow-brushed earth, she let her lips part. Just a hum at first, tentative, fragile. It wasn't a song she knew. It was just the sound that lived in her bones, echoing the rhythm of a mother who once sang over her cradle. The notes wavered, but they didn't break. She sang of nothing and everything, of the hollow inside her ribs, of the hand that had made her tremble, of the boy she'd never held, of the door that had slammed shut behind her when she'd been thrown out. She sang like someone, sweeping the ashes of her own soul, note by note. She didn't notice the eyes watching her from the trees, didn't feel the presence that had stepped out of the shadows near the lodge. She only noticed the fire shift. And then she saw him. The chief. He didn't speak, didn't sit. He just stood at the edge of the circle, arms crossed over his chest, listening. His eyes were unreadable, but they didn't carry pity. They carried witness. And she kept singing. Her voice cracked once. She thought she might stop. But something in his stillness steadied her. She continued, the song now stronger, drawn not from her throat but from the deep well she'd hidden behind silence. When it ended, she looked away, embarrassed by her own courage. She wiped her cheeks, though she hadn't felt herself cry. "I didn't mean to wake anyone," she said hoarsely. He stepped forward then, slowly. "You didn't wake me," he said. "I couldn't sleep." He crouched beside the fire, not too close, not assuming, just enough to warm his hands. "Why did you sing?" he asked. She almost said she didn't know, but she did. "Because I needed to remember the sound of myself," she said. "Not how they made me sound." He nodded. "Then tonight was the first time they didn't win." She turned to look at him. "Do you always speak like an elder?" His mouth twitched. Maybe the beginning of a smile. "Number, but sometimes I remember things that help." She held his gaze. "Thank you. For earlier. For not being afraid of what you saw." He didn't look away. "I wasn't afraid," he said. "I was angry. And I was honored." "Honored?" He nodded. "To witness someone still standing, after what should have broken them." The words curled around her like a second fire. She didn't say anything more. Neither did he. But they sat together until the moon began to dip and the stars softened, until the world felt different, somehow. At dawn, she stirred to the sound of water being poured and wood being split. She hadn't returned to the women's quarters. Instead, she'd stayed by the fire until her limbs gave out, and she curled beneath the buffalo hide they'd left beside her, sleep claiming her like a long-lost sister. Now, Tanathoa was kneeling nearby, brewing something over the coals. Pine needles, wild ginger root, something that smelled like earth after rain. She sat up slowly, brushing hair from her face, her body stiff but lighter somehow. He didn't look over at first, just stirred the steaming brew, calm as windless air. "You didn't go inside," he said finally. "Didn't need to," she answered, her voice still thick with sleep. He nodded, as if it confirmed something. Then he reached for a woven pouch beside him and unwrapped a bundle of salves and folded linen strips. He didn't move toward her, just placed the bundle between them and backed up, giving her space. "For your ribs," he said. "No one else will touch you unless you ask." She stared at the bundle. then at him, then back at the fire. "How do you know what to use?" she asked. "Because I watched what they did to my sister once," he said, "and I stayed up 3 nights learning what might ease her pain when she couldn't speak." There was no pride in the way he said it, just fact, just quiet memory. She nodded, fingers tightening slightly around the hide. "You could have offered to help. You didn't have to wait until I asked." He shook his head gently. "Then it wouldn't be help. It'd be a reminder that you needed it. Some wounds heal better without someone hovering." She looked at him then. Not just looked, but saw. The thick braids wrapped in leather ties, the steady hands, the lines of concern around his mouth that didn't soften his strength but shaped it. "You speak like someone who's been alone too long," she murmured, "or someone who listens more than he speaks." His eyes lifted to meet hers. "Both," he said. Then he stood. "I'll go get snow water. Drink first, then salve. You don't owe me anything." He stepped away into the trees, his form slipping between the shadows and the pale morning light. She reached for the bundle. Unwrapped it slowly, reverently. The salve smelled of sage and something warmer. Bear fat, maybe. She dipped her fingers into it and touched her ribs, flinching only slightly. The cool balm brought more than numbness. It brought memory. But not the kind that haunted. The kind that reminded her she'd lived. Every breath hurt, but it meant her lungs still worked, her heart still beat. She finished wrapping the linen herself, clumsy but sufficient. When he returned, she looked up at him and said simply, "Thank you." He offered her a tin cup of snow water and crouched down again. "You did it," he said. "Not me." She shook her head. "Number, I did it because someone saw me and didn't flinch. That changes things." He looked down, picked up a stick, and drew something in the dirt between them, a circle with 2 lines crossing through it. "That's you," he said, "still standing, but not alone anymore." She blinked. The wind stirred the ashes of the fire. She didn't know if it was healing yet, but it felt close. It wasn't a grand gesture the way he said it. There was no ceremony, no music in the trees or whispered omens in the wind. Just the quiet hush of evening descending over the camp, and the 2 of them sitting near the river, her feet in the water, his hands resting on his knees. She had ventured there after supper, not knowing if he'd follow. But he did. He always did, eventually, with the same silence and steadiness that now felt more comforting than any words. She spoke first this time. "You never asked me where I came from." He glanced over but didn't answer immediately. Then, "You'd tell me when you were ready." She smiled, faint and weary. "It's a place where girls like me are meant to be quiet and pretty and useful. When we fail at one, we're punished for the others." She traced circles in the water with her toe. "They gave me to your people to avoid blood, but they didn't ask if I had any left to give." The shadows danced on the river, catching the gold in her hair, the bruise at her temple already fading. "You're not a gift," he said at last. "You're someone they gave away so they wouldn't feel guilt. That's different." His voice was low, steady, like a drum beneath her thoughts. "But I accepted you anyway. Not for the tribe. For me." Her breath caught. "Why?" He turned his face towards the water. "Because the night you arrived, when you sat on that bed and cried into your hands, I saw someone who hadn't been touched with kindness in a long time. And I thought, if she stays, I'll never let her be hurt like that again." The tears came too quickly for her to stop. She wiped at her cheeks with the back of her hand, embarrassed. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't expect you to say something like that." He shifted closer but still didn't reach for her. Instead, he looked directly into her eyes and said, "I've been waiting for you." The words didn't crash like thunder. They landed like snowfall, soft, certain, impossible to ignore. "Not someone like you," he added. "You." She looked at him then, really looked, at the line of his jaw, the steady breath, the strength wrapped in patience. She thought of every man who had taken something from her, and then of this man who had only ever offered stillness, time, and warmth. "What if I never learn to stop flinching?" she asked. "Then I'll stay still until you don't," he said. Her shoulders collapsed inward. The ache in her chest shifted from fear to something more tender. Grief, perhaps, but not just grief. Possibility. "I don't know if I can give you anything back," she said. "You don't owe me anything," he replied. "But if you stay, we can build something new." The river lapped gently at the banks. Behind them, the camp was settling down, the fires flickering low. She leaned her head against his shoulder. Just for a second. He didn't move, didn't speak, but he stayed. That night she dreamed of her feet planted in soft soil, and something growing, slowly, quietly, but unmistakably alive. She woke with the sense that something had changed. The air felt fuller, as if it carried a promise. Outside the lodge, women were sweeping the earth with long-handled brooms made from bundled twigs, and the scent of smoked sage drifted like memory through the stillness. No one said anything to her as she stepped out, barefoot, hair loose, wearing the soft buckskin shift they'd given her. But every gaze she met held something she hadn't known how to receive until now: acceptance, without demand. He was already there, standing near the central fire, with the same quiet patience he always carried. But today he wore a beaded band across his brow, and the turquoise stone at his chest glinted with the morning sun. She walked toward him, unsure what was expected, heart drumming like she was still that trembling girl on the wedding bed. But no one pushed her, no elder spoke, no drumbeat rose. Only a quiet circle of people, standing at a respectful distance, and him, waiting. When she stopped in front of him, he didn't take her hand. Instead, he knelt slowly, not to worship or beg, but to ground himself. Then, reaching behind him, he lifted a folded piece of leather, soft, worn, painted with simple lines, and offered it with both hands. "This belonged to my mother," he said. "She taught me to walk gently. It kept me warm in snow. Now I offer it to you, not because you need it, but because it's mine." She didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, she knelt too, and took the leather wrap from his hands. "Then I'll carry your warmth," she said. No vows, no kiss, no priest. Just two people, sitting on the same level, choosing to share the road ahead. One of the older women stepped forward silently and tied a red thread around both their wrists, his right, her left, then backed away. It was over. But also, just beginning. The fire popped softly behind them, and the warmth touched her skin not like the one in town, demanding and blinding, but like sunlight breaking through pine, slow and alive. That evening, as she walked to the river alone to breathe, she saw the cub again. Older now, moving without limp, nosing through the tall grass for insects. It paused when it saw her, head tilting. "You brought me here," she whispered. The cub stepped forward and brushed its nose against her calf, before disappearing into the underbrush. She turned and found him watching from a distance. "Was that a blessing?" she asked when he joined her. "Maybe," he said, "or maybe just a friend checking in." They stood together, watching the water. She didn't ask what came next. She didn't need to. For the first time, the future wasn't a shadow, it was a path. and her feet, bare, bruised, healed, were ready to walk it. Behind her, the fire in the lodge glowed steadily. In front, the river kept moving, and between them she stood, wrapped in warmth not taken, but freely given. They came at dawn, riding 2 by 2, wrapped in woven cloaks that told of desert heat and long silence. Miriam heard them before she saw them, hoofbeats like slow thunder rolling from the southern ridge, too steady to be raiders, too calm to be lawmen. By the time she stepped from the lodge, the circle of the village was already forming. No panic, just readiness. He stood at the center, arms crossed, expression unreadable, watching them approach like he'd known they'd come. "Relatives?" she asked, stepping to his side. He shook his head. "Not mine, but they'll speak to me first." The horses slowed, and the men dismounted without urgency. Their leader was tall, older, with a scar from temple to cheek, and the kind of stillness that made others lower their eyes. He looked at her once, long, deep, and then turned to the man beside her. They didn't speak in English. Not yet. But she could feel the weight of it, whatever was being exchanged in soft syllables and measured nods. When the elder gestured to her, she tensed. He said something with a voice like wind scraping rock, and the man beside her finally turned. "They've come to ask if you'll go with them." The ground beneath her might as well have shifted. "Why?" she whispered. "Because they heard of a woman who walked into the north with nothing but scars and a cub, and lived." Her breath caught. "They say one of their young ones has stopped speaking. A girl who won't eat, won't sleep, won't meet anyone's eyes. They believe maybe you could help her." "Why me?" "Because they think you remember how to come back from silence." She didn't answer right away. The village watched without pressure. No one spoke for her. Not even him. Finally, she asked, "How long would I be gone?" "As long as it takes. They'll wait outside the village until you decide." She stepped away. Not to flee, but to think. The same path the cub had once taken down toward the water now opened before her, empty and sunlit. She walked it slowly, barefoot in the dust, feeling the tug of both choices. To stay in this warmth, this peace, this home she had somehow earned, or to offer that same shelter to someone else who didn't yet know it existed. By the time she returned, her hands were steady. She looked at him first. "Will you wait for me?" she asked. He didn't smile. He didn't speak sweet promises. He only nodded once and said, "You're already in everything I do." "I'll wait." Then she turned to the southern elder and said, in English, "Tell her I'm coming." Not to fix her, just to sit beside her until she's ready to speak. The elder bowed his head, not deeply, but enough to mean something. That night she packed not much, just the wrap he'd given her, the thread still on her wrist, and a piece of smoked meat wrapped in hide. She left her old dress behind, folded neatly. No longer needed. Before she mounted one of their spare ponies, the cub emerged once again, pacing beside the horse as if to check her footing. "Are you going with me?" she asked, smiling, but the cub only circled once, licked her toe, and trotted back into the grass. "Then I'll carry your courage," she whispered. And with that, she rode south. The girl wouldn't come out of the blanket, not for food, not for water, not even when the wind rattled the tent poles like bones. Miriam sat beside her, silent. The journey south had taken 6 days. The people had been kind, offering her a space near the edge of their camp. The girl's name was Leah, 8 winters old. Skin, like polished stone, hair so tangled it clung to her cheeks. She hadn't spoken in over a month. They told Miriam that Leah had watched her mother burn during a raid. She hadn't cried since, hadn't spoken. Not one word, And now, wrapped in a tight cocoon of hide, she lay curled on a mat of woven grass, only her toes visible. For 2 nights Miriam had sat beside her in silence, tracing small figures in the dirt, whispering stories meant not to be heard but felt. She didn't ask questions, didn't say the girl should be brave. She only existed beside her, warm and present, like a shadow that refused to leave. On the 3rd night she began to hum, a tune she remembered from the mountain. Low, slow, something the cub had whimpered once when the snow howled. She didn't know the meaning. She only knew it felt like safety. Firelight flickered across the hides, throwing shapes against the walls. Miriam unwrapped a strip of dried meat and broke it into halves. She placed one piece beside the girl and nibbled the other herself. Then, she took her fingers and began to press them into the ground. Dot, dot, line, over and over, a rhythm, the kind a child might play when alone. Still no movement, but she kept doing it, as if the dust itself needed the pattern. Hours passed, and then, so faint she nearly missed it, one small foot moved, toes curled. Miriam didn't flinch. She just kept humming, pressing. Again, again, until a tiny hand emerged and pressed beside hers. Not perfect, not quite right, but trying. The girl's hand trembled, hovering, then a finger traced one line, barely touching the dirt. Miriam exhaled softly, as if not to scare the moment away. "That's good," she whispered, not looking directly at her. "You don't have to speak. Not yet. But I'll hear you anyway." A rustle, a breath, then the hide fell away like a shed skin, and the girl sat upright, cheeks hollow, eyes impossibly wide, her mouth opened, then shut again. Miriam waited. No pressure, no rush. And then in a voice so broken it scratched the air, Leia asked, "Where's your bear?" Miriam blinked. "My bear?" "The one who walked with you." It wasn't a dream. Somehow the girl had known. Maybe from a story, maybe something deeper. "He's in the mountains still," Miriam said. "But I carry him in here." She touched her chest. "He taught me how to be quiet without being alone." The girl stared, then reached a hand forward and touched Miriam's arm, just once. I think I saw him, in the smoke. He was waiting." Miriam nodded slowly. "He's still waiting. For both of us." Outside, the fire cracked. The elder stood at a distance, unmoving, witnessing the moment without entering it. The girl leaned forward and whispered, "Will you sleep beside me?" Miriam wrapped her arms around her and pulled her gently close. "As long as you need." That night, there were no more songs, only breathing, matched, steady, alive. They didn't leave at dawn. They left when the girl took Miriam's hand without being asked. There was no ceremony, no goodbye feast, only quiet nods from the elders and a bundle of smoked meat handed over by the healer woman, who'd said nothing but had watched everything. The walk back north took longer than expected, not because of the terrain, though it was steep in places, but because neither Miriam nor Leia seemed in a hurry. They paused often, to watch ants carry crumbs across a flat stone, to feel water pass over their ankles at the river crossing, to sit on a fallen log and listen to nothing but the wind. No one chased them. No one waited ahead. The mountain came into view 2 days later, and both stopped without speaking. Leia looked up at it, not in fear, but recognition. "It's quiet here," she said, the first sentence she'd offered, without prompting. Miriam nodded. "That's why I came." Leia didn't ask what had happened before. She only asked what they'd do now, and Miriam answered with no hesitation. "We'll build something. Doesn't have to be much. Just a place to sleep. To be." They found the old cabin half swallowed by snow and time. The roof had caved in, but the walls still stood. Miriam smiled and touched the doorway like an old friend's face. "He was here," she whispered, almost to herself. Leia turned. "The bear?" Miriam shook her head. "Numbered the man. The one who said, 'I've been waiting.'" Leia tilted her head. "Did he leave?" "No," Miriam said softly. "He just finished what he came for." The child didn't press. Instead, she knelt by the stones and began stacking them, making a little circle, as if to hold a fire not yet lit. Miriam joined her. They rebuilt slowly. Days passed. One night, Miriam woke to find Leia gone, panic rising in her throat like smoke. But then she stepped outside and saw her, at the edge of the trees, feeding something. A shape in the dark, small, furry, a cub, or maybe not. It vanished into the woods before Miriam reached it, but Leia turned and smiled, and that was enough. "He's watching us," the girl said, "making sure we don't forget how to care." By spring, flowers grew through the cracks in the floor. Miriam planted herbs. Leia found feathers and strung them into wind charms that sang in the breeze. They didn't talk much, but their silences were never empty. One evening, as the sun sank behind the ridge, Leia placed something in Miriam's lap. A stone, smooth and dark, etched with a small symbol, 3 lines crossing a circle. "It means remember," the girl said. "They taught me." Miriam traced it with her thumb. "I won't forget." And she meant it. Not the mountain, not the snow, not the fire, not the man with the eyes like frost and hands that never asked but always offered. Not the cub, not the way it had nudged her forward when everything else said to give up. At the doorway, she hung the stone by a thread. It clinked when the wind touched it, soft and steady, like a voice that never stopped calling her name. And every time it sang, she answered. Not in words, but in living. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on Stories Left Behind. If you had seen her sitting there alone, would you have untied her shoes too? Tell us in the comments.